they called the OBGYN back in, and he comes in and he says, okay, looks like baby's going to be born. I need you to get on your back, turn around and get on your back. And that way you can push and I can offer you perennial support. And I didn't want to push on my back. I had already decided I wanted to push on my hands and knees. I already knew that I wanted that. And so I said, no, I don't want to push on my back. And this was, mind you, like through a contraction at the very end when he's about to be born. It's very intense. It's hard to speak when you're at that point.
Yeah.
And so I said, no, I would not like that. And he said, you have to. He said, you have to push on your back. And so I said, I will not turn around and push on my back. And I do not want you to offer me perennial support. And I wasn't facing him. Obviously, I was on my hands and knees. And my mom and my husband said he sat down on the little stool they sit on that spins, he sat down in his little chair and he spun around to face away from me and crossed his arms and sat there.
Like a child.
Yes, like a child. Yes.
Hi, I'm Kayla Heater, follower of Jesus, wife and mother of 5 children, Christian childbirth educator and doula, and your host of the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, where we share God-centered birth stories, evidence-based birth education, and our pursuit of surrendering our birth plans to God. Let's get started. Hey everybody, happy Thanksgiving week. It is here, which is crazy. Once you get into the fall and the holidays, everything just moves so quickly. But happy Thanksgiving week. We actually have a longer episode for you this week, so it's great for if you're traveling or, cooking a big meal or things like that. Great to listen to. We love Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is my husband's favorite holiday. Started off, by watching that parade first thing in the morning. I usually get all snuggled up on the couch under blankets and have breakfast and coffee and watch the whole parade, and then usually hop in the shower real quick and get ready. And we all go over to my mom's house and just eat food and hang out and play outside and eat pie and have coffee and all the things. And then we end the night by watching Elf. It used to be Christmas Vacation, but then once we had kids, we changed it to Elf. So we watch Elf at our house to sort of kick off the Christmas season. Except this year we kicked off the Christmas season early. For the first time in my whole life, all 36 years on this earth, we started our Christmas celebrations early. We started listening to Christmas music, started watching Christmas movies. We put up our tree, we decorated, all the things. We've just, in all transparency, we have some hard things going on right now for our family, and it's been very emotional and just really, really sad and really hard. And so I am trying to, in my efforts, lift our spirits by allowing us, just a couple more weeks of enjoying the Christmas season and having everything, up and decorated and whatnot a little bit early this year. So I'm hoping it helps, but regardless, my kids are enjoying it. It's beautiful. And we're excited. I'm ready for a fire in the fireplace every single night. That's kind of my thing. Once we start fire season, I'm like, every night, just give me a fire every single night. We have a wood burning, so it's great. Smells good. It's warm. It's wonderful. All right. But speaking of the holidays, once they start, I feel like it just goes so fast. Like time just speeds up from mid-October to January 1st. It's just like lightning because there's always so many things going on. But believe it or not, our next childbirth class starts in January. So if you are local-ish, I have people kind of drive in sometimes up to an hour, sometimes a little bit more than an hour to get to this class. So if you are local-ish to, the triad of North Carolina, and you are expecting a baby this spring, so, March, April, May, maybe even early June if you want to get a jump on things, or maybe even late February. But if you're expecting a spring baby, we would love to have you in this class. We start in January. It's 5 weeks long. So we meet once a week for 5 weeks, and we go over every single thing you would ever need to know. And it is, of course, a Christian class based in God's word. So if that is something you need or somebody you know needs, please get in touch with me so I can get you on the list for this upcoming group childbirth class. I also do offer private classes. So those at any time, if that just, doesn't fit in your schedule or you need one sooner or you need one a different day of the week or something, I also do private classes where I come to your home and teach in your home on your schedule. So that is something as well. But we're excited. But this January will be here before you know it. So if you are interested in that class, please go ahead and reach out to me. Just contact me, and the episode show notes has my contact information. So just get in touch with me and we'll get you on that list. Okay, let's jump into this week's episode. Jaylynn was dealt some hard cards in this broken world, but her faith is in God, and she knows how the story ends. As she planned her first birth, a home birth, those plans came crashing down when she was diagnosed with severe pre-eclampsia and had to be immediately induced at the hospital with a 2-week NICU stay for her son. Then, when she gets a beautiful birth for her second, she had to say goodbye to him all too soon to be reunited with him again one day in heaven. Finally, as she's expecting her third baby, all of the fears come rushing back as she gets preeclampsia again and doesn't know if she'll have the strength to push through. But God does. This heart-wrenching story will have you up and down and back up again. So grab the tissues and prepare your hearts to be moved in faith. Welcome to another episode of Surrendered Birth Stories. I am your host, Kayla Heater, and I have Jaylynn with me today. Jaylynn, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, your family, your life. Help us get to know you.
Okay, well, I am a wife and a mother to 3 boys, 2 that are here with us and 1 that's in heaven. And I'm married to my husband, and we've been married for 4 years. And he's from Mexico, and we're Christian, and he's been called to go back to Mexico and start a church where he's from. So we'll be missionaries to Mexico. We just had another baby in June, and now we'll be soon starting the deputation, a part of that, where we'll go around to churches and raise support to be missionaries and go to Mexico. So hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll be in Mexico, being able to do that. So we'll
That's
be,
exciting.
yeah.
Wait, so where do y'all live right now?
We live in Kentucky right now. We live in Lexington, Kentucky, and we met at college, and then we graduated and got married. And it's always been part of that he's known that God has called him back to Mexico. And he came to the States when he was a child, when he was about 6 or 7 years old, I believe, and he's been here ever since. And then so we're working through the process to be able to go back and forth, and then also the deputation trail. So we're just excited. We've had 3 babies here in the States, but I guess at some point I will be giving birth in Mexico as well. So that's something to be excited about, but probably a little nervous about too.
Just a whole new system to learn down there, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow,
sure.
That's just so cool. Do you guys have like timelines in mind, or is it just sort of like as things kind of come into alignment?
We're hoping that, because we'll go on deputation. We don't know how long that would be, because we have to raise enough support. I don't know what the number is, to be honest, but once we raise that, then we'll be able to go. So however long that process takes, and usually we have several friends, and then also my dad is a missionary kid as well. So like kind of just talking to them, it's usually a couple of years, like 1 or 2 years, sometimes 3. I know probably some people it takes 4. It just depends on how many meetings you take, like how active you are at raising that support.
Yeah.
And as the Lord provides, that's a big part of it too. So we're hoping in the next 2 years. I mean, my husband would go tomorrow if we could go, but we're hoping that the process will be, pretty quick to be able to get over there.
That's awesome. That is, Yeah, that's a great picture into who y'all are. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. We're very excited. I'm nervous. I don't think he's nervous, but I'm
He's just
nervous.
ready.
So yeah, he's ready. So yeah, there's a lot of busyness that will be happening over the next several months for us. Yeah. So
Yeah. Wow.
yeah.
Well, let's get into your stories. Let's go back to baby number 1, pregnancy number 1. Take us all the way back there. How did that come about? How did y'all decide, or did you decide that you were ready to get pregnant with your first baby?
Well, it was very soon after we had been married. Obviously, we've had 3 babies in 4 years.
Right.
So yes, we had the first one right away, and it was, praise the Lord, it wasn't hard to become pregnant. We didn't deal with that struggle. So right away, we were blessed with him, and so we got married in October. He was due in August, and he ended up coming. He had to come in July, which is part of the story, but. From the start, I knew that I wanted a home birth. I actually kind of, looking back, I guess it was a little bit naive that I just assumed I could have a home birth. I didn't know as much about it as I do now. And now it seems kind of still an unreachable goal for me, but still a dream nonetheless. But yeah, at the time I just thought, well, because I was born at home.
Oh, cool.
So my mom, I kind of grew up with that, like that, just like the idea, well, my mom she had 4 children and she had 3 of us at home. And so I was just like, well, that's what I'll do. That's just how it's done. And so I kind of just assumed that I'd be able to do that. And I was really blindsided when things went the other way. So that was part of the difficulty of dealing with that, was that I had kind of taken it for granted that it's a big blessing to be able to birth at home. And so I had it all planned. I had a home birth midwife, and I had my birth pool, and our house was actually, my husband has been renovating it this whole time. And now we're just now to the point where it's almost done. At the time, it was very, very basic. It was very much so not finished.
Yeah.
But I was still going to birth at home. So the midwife was great. And she set me up with a local hospital to do like my lab tests and things like that. And then she would do all the rest of the care. So yeah, she was amazing. And my pregnancy was really, really hard. I had a lot. I think looking back, I had some level of HG. I just didn't know it. And I thought every time somebody would ask me if I was okay or how I was doing, I would say, oh yeah, I'm all right. I think it's normal. And like looking back, I think it probably wasn't.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'd never stopped throwing up the whole 9 months. I really, really struggled. I lost weight during the whole pregnancy. I felt awful all the time. It was really, really hard. And so looking back, I think that was part of the reason why my body struggled more. I think now, after having 3 babies, I think my body struggles a little bit and leans towards the pre-eclampsia side of things. And so I think looking back with my nutrition, obviously wasn't good. And then throwing up everything anyway, it's no surprise to me that I developed it. At the time, it was a big surprise. So I got to 37, I was 37 weeks and 6 days. And I had been feeling awful, but I had been feeling awful the whole pregnancy. So I really didn't notice a big shift.
Right.
I was swollen, but it was July and I was 8 months pregnant. So I was like, well, there's no way I'm not going to be swollen. And the swelling was extremely bad though. Like it was to the point where they were concerned about that, but I hadn't had the other signs of preeclampsia. So they weren't, they tested me for the other things. There was no protein in my urine, things like that. So it was, there was trace. They said
Traces.
I had traced the whole pregnancy. So it was okay because it hadn't gone up yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So they just were watching the swelling because it was extreme. It was extremely bad. But at 37 weeks and 6 days, I woke up and I remember just going about my day, waking up and getting ready and stuff. And I got a headache. And I remember I was seeing spots. And I knew that was a sign of preeclampsia. Mm-hmm. And so I was worried, but I also knew I used to have migraines as a teenager and they had the same exact symptoms of like the spots in front of your eyes. And so I thought maybe this is one of those migraines. But then in the back of my mind, I knew, well, you're pregnant now. And so this is also a pre-eclampsia thing.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, I told my husband, and he said, well, because we had a midwife appointment that afternoon at 1, I think it was at noon or 1 that she was supposed to get there. He said, well, let's just wait for her to get here, and you'll be able to tell her about it, and she'll be able to tell you what it is or what to do. And I was like, okay. Well, by the time she got here, I felt horrible. It had not gone away. And she got here and took my blood pressure, and my first reading was 150/110.
Mm.
And she said, go ahead and lay down on your left side. And just because we need to get this down from that 150/110. And so I did. And I think it went down marginally. It wasn't even that big of a difference. It was not that much. And I knew in my head, I told my husband later, I knew in my head, as soon as I laid down, this is going to spiral. This is not like, I knew, I was like, this is the end of my home birth. Like, this is it. There's no more home birth. And so he didn't know that at the time, because he wasn't tracking how serious that was. He wasn't aware. And I knew in my head, because I had done all the research and stuff. And I was like, no, this is the end. So I'm crying immediately, and my midwife is trying to calm me down because she doesn't want my blood pressure to go even higher. So she sent me to the hospital, and we were in triage for quite a while, and all my blood pressure readings were terrible. They checked my urine, very much protein. They came and told me, we're going to have to induce right now. So that was officially the end of my home birth.
Mm.
So the hospital was great. Looking back on the way that all of it happened, I don't have any complaints about how the hospital was. I was thankfully able to do midwives in that hospital. And now, kind of knowing more about the hospitals in my area, I'm glad and thankful that I had gone with them, because I think they're the best in our area.
Oh, good.
And they certainly have the best NICU, and then they have the midwives. And now I have enough experience to know I love the midwives there. I still want to do a home birth, but if I have to have a hospital birth, I'm glad that I was able to be there.
Yeah.
And so they're very natural minded. Like, they're still like able to see that side of things, even though it is the hospital. So I appreciate that a lot. And so I got checked in, they got me a room, and I was, from the moment, they all tell me, oh, it was because you were in labor. And I'm like, no, I was shaking from the moment I was there. Like, I just couldn't stop shaking. I was terrified. I didn't even know, because again, I was so just in my mind, naively thinking home birth. I had not prepared for an induction mentally at all. So I was really blindsided by that. And I didn't even know how it would go down. I had done research on a lot of other things and I just didn't research induction, because I just thought I won't be having to have that.
Right.
Exactly. So I really just, looking back, I'm like, well, I wish I had thought about it a little bit. But yeah, so they started me with Cervidil and a Foley bulb. And I still to this day believe that a Foley bulb is some type of torture device. I really, I'm not a big fan of the Foley bulb. And it was rough for my first. And then later on, I'll tie it in with later on, because now I've had 2 of them with a Foley bulb. But the whole induction was 45 hours long, because my body wasn't ready. And then plus when you have preeclampsia, I think sometimes you can get away with not needing it, but most of the time I think you need magnesium.
Yes.
If it's severe enough.
To lower your blood pressure.
Yes. Yeah. And it also keeps you from having seizures and stuff while you have the preeclampsia. And so it makes you feel awful. It makes you feel so sick and just really, really bad. And it actually they actually give that to women who are in preterm labor as well, to stop their contraction. So it really fights the whole induction process. And I didn't even know that at the time. And now I know, even with my third, which was a similar story, they told me if we have women coming in who have to be induced with magnesium as well, we know to just settle in for a couple of days. Like, the nurses told me this. They're like, we know to just settle in, because it's not going to happen right away, because they fight each other, the two things. So plus it was my first baby and I wasn't ready. My body wasn't ready. It was so many factors.
You had all these cards stacked against you.
Yes. Yeah. And I actually didn't know all of that at the time, because again, I was a little bit more naive. And so I'm glad I didn't know that, but it was an uphill climb. It was an uphill climb to just get my body to be in labor. So it was a very long uphill climb of an induction. And I had the Foley bulb. It got me to where they wanted. And then I believe after the Foley bulb, they did another round at some point of Cervidil to try to just, I guess, ripen things a little bit, I believe. And then they started Pitocin. I think I was about 4 or 5 when they started Pitocin centimeter. And once they started that, I remember I was managing well enough. My mom was there, my husband was there. And I remember at the time this was during COVID. So this was 2021. So they let me have my mom and my husband, and they told me if I want, and I looking back, I regret this, but they said, if you want, you can have your home birth midwife come in and she could kind of serve as your doula if you want. And at the time, I remember feeling so embarrassed. And looking back, I wish I hadn't felt this way and done this, but I just remember thinking, no, I can't have her here because I was so embarrassed I couldn't have the home birth, that my body was not able to do that. And I just remember
Oh,
being embarrassed. And I said, no, 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 that's okay. And so looking back, I wish I would have brought her in, because I think she would have been able to definitely be an asset in that situation and coach me through certain things for sure.
yeah.
So that was a big regret. Looking back, I wish that I had just not been embarrassed and not been ashamed, because I think I didn't realize I was feeling that way. I just my gut instinct was like, no, 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 she can't be here. She can't see this, but looking back, she could have helped me a lot.
Yeah.
So I said no, but my mom and my husband were there, and I was really, during the whole induction, I remember just being really disoriented as well. But this is magnesium as well. Magnesium will do this to you.
Right.
Um, but I just remember, I think part of it was being so blindsided by the fact that now I was being induced, and I really had not prepared for that at all. It was just really it really threw me. And I was dealing with a lot of emotions from that, and knowing now, I'm never getting that home birth. And not only am I not getting the home birth, but this is going really far in a different direction that I never really anticipated.
Yeah.
And so that was really hard to kind of cope with emotionally while you're being induced with labor for the first time. So it was really it was just a lot. I remember being very overwhelmed and just really scared. And the home birth it broke my heart, because like I said, I was born at home. So I was really excited about that. I was really excited to be able to do that. My husband was actually born at home as well. And the midwife was like, that never happens. So she was
Yeah.
really excited too. She's like, that never happens. Both of you were born at home, and now you're going to have a home birth. This is this is really crazy. So we were really excited about that as well. So my husband was the only baby of his siblings. His mom had 5, and he was the only one born at home. And so it's just a really cool setup. We just were really excited about that. So it broke my heart. But as the induction went along, looking back, I thought it was about 6 centimeters along. And I didn't know it at the time, but I believe I was actually in transition. I was definitely transitioning. And that was when the point where obviously I wanted a home birth. So I had wanted unmedicated. I didn't want an epidural. And so now, in that moment, getting to transition, and I didn't know it was transition. I think if I had known it was transition, I probably could have hung in a little longer, but I didn't realize that. I didn't know that. I had last been checked and I was 6, and I thought, okay, and it wasn't that long. And so I thought, I'm just still at 6. And so I said, I need the epidural. I couldn't. I started getting really like I was going to pass out. The magnesium makes you feel weak to begin with.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to be on my hands and knees, and I had been laboring that way. And that's actually been consistent for all 3 of my babies. I've always preferred to labor and birth on my hands and knees. And I was trying to do that, but I was so weak, I couldn't maintain it anymore. And so I had to turn around and sit, and even sitting, I was like, I literally cannot do this. I have to have the epidural. And I was disappointed. That also brought more disappointment, that I was now seeing as how I saw it, giving in and getting the epidural. And so I was really, really just disappointed in myself. I felt like my body failed me. I felt like just all of these emotions surrounding that, just like your birth plan goes completely opposite. You feel like it's out of control. And so that was really, really rough. So I asked for the epidural. The anesthesiologist was with someone else. So it took a while. And so I have scoliosis, and
Mm.
and I have a curve right
Right
where the
there.
epidural, would normally be. And so he struggled a lot to find the placement, and it took over an hour for him to place it.
Whoa.
Yes. And he had to call another doctor in to help him because he would place it. And then he told me afterwards, he said, I would insert the needle. And I thought for sure that was your back and the epidural space or whatever they call it.
Uh-huh.
And then he said, and then it wasn't. And he said, and that happened. Oh, he placed it probably close to 10 times.
Whoa.
Trying to place it. Yes. And I have something called Ehlers-Danlos, and that makes it to where like local anesthetic and then anesthetic in general doesn't really work as well. And so the lidocaine didn't work. I could feel it. Like it would work for a second and then I could feel it wear off very rapidly. Like it would only work for a few seconds before he even placed the epidural. So I could feel him place the epidural every time. And I would tell him, I would say, hey, I can feel that. And he would say, and he thought I just meant the pressure. That you can kind of feel a little pressure. And he's like, does it feel like a sharp pain or like pressure? And I said, both. And he said, oh, okay. And he's like then he's rushing to get more lidocaine there. And I was like, the lidocaine is not really working. And I didn't know this, of course, at the time. I was in transition while he's placing it because I started shaking uncontrollably even more. And I was, they have you hunched over and they wouldn't let my husband the anesthesiologist, they made him sit down because they said, some husbands faint.
Pass out,
which I know my husband, he wouldn't have. I know he isn't like that. And now after having 3 babies in front of him, I know he wouldn't faint. But at the time they're like, no, you have to sit in a chair. And I was like, can you just come over and help me? And they're like, no. So the other doctor actually came around and held me up. And so because I looked down, I remember sweating and the sweat was just dripping off my face down to the ground. And I was like, this is like another level. I don't know what's going on, but I was so focused on trying to do what they told me to do that I just kind of like powered through it. And at one point I was like, no, I just forget the epidural because I'm pretty sure this is the end. Yeah. And it was. By the time they got it in, he said, push the button and it'll work. It'll take effect in 15 minutes. And so I said, okay. Well, I probably didn't say okay because I wasn't in my headspace to say okay, but so I agreed. And then he left. The midwife came right in. I think even before he left, she checked me and I was 9 centimeters.
Yeah.
And she said, do you want me to break your water? And I said, no, that's okay. Because I always thought, well, breaking your water makes it more intense. That's what I always heard. Yeah. And I was like, I can barely handle this. So I was like, I can't handle this because I asked for the epidural. So don't break my water. I'm done.
Right.
So he said, okay, well, when she came out, she accidentally broke my water. Like it was that far. She's just like, I didn't even mean to do that. And I could tell she was just moving her hand. Boom, it broke. And so then he was coming. It was just, that was the end. The epidural hadn't even started yet. Like it wasn't even taking effect all the way. It was right after. So, but once the epidural was in my system, he had really bad, I forget what they call it, but his heart rate went down really far.
His heart tones. Yeah.
Yes. To a dangerous level. And they started flipping me around on the bed to different positions. They put the bed, I forget what they call it now, but it's where the feet are up in the air and the head is down to try to, I think, the blood flow for baby. And I think at some point, I don't know why, I'm pretty sure I don't know if I passed out, but I know I remember blacking out a little bit and they were trying to wake me up with
smelling salts,
alcohol wipes. Yeah. The alcohol wipes, because they're so strong. And so, yeah, so his heart tones were really bad and they couldn't get them to come back by me moving around and trying to flip everything around. And so they said that all of a sudden, because of the readings on the monitor, I'm sure the OB came in. I had my midwife already in there. The OB runs in and she says, prep the table. We're going to do a C-section because his heart tones were so bad. And I'm just in the middle, like, I don't know how to process anything. I'm just like, I felt like I was like, not even a part of anything, not even able to make choices or anything. Not that you can make a choice about that, but like, just really felt like it was being done to me at that point,
Yeah.
And so, she said, we're going to have to do a C-section. And so they started prepping and all of a sudden there's like 10 people in the room and they're going to move me to, I guess, the OR. And so it was just craziness. And then all of a sudden, which this was God, 100%, his heart rate came back and the midwife stepped in. And this is something I am forever grateful for, that she stepped in and she said, his heart rate is back. And she said, if you want, you can push him out, but you're going to have to do it fast because we don't know how long we have his heart rate for. And so I said, okay. So we started pushing and I pushed for 27 minutes, I believe. And so she said, that was a good job for your first baby.
Yeah.
And so, but I was like, yeah, but you told me he was dying. So,
So I was motivated.
Yes. So he came out completely purple, not moving, not breathing, nothing. They handed him to me for literally 1 second. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. I literally only held it for 1 second because he wasn't breathing. And they took him, and he didn't cry. He didn't move. His APGAR was 0. I believe his first APGAR was 0 because he was doing nothing. He literally wasn't. He had to be revived.
Yeah.
And the plan was for my husband to go with him. So they took him to that little room. So my husband went with him, and they had to revive him over there.
So imagine that was scary for you.
Oh, yeah.
Or were you even like cognitively aware of what was going on?
Yeah, I think it was scary, but it's also at that point of being on magnesium for 2 days, my brain was struggling to keep up. And I really had a hard time, even people saying things to me. I remember like repeating what they were saying to me because I couldn't understand. It wouldn't sink in what they were saying. And I would think, oh, I know those words, but I don't know how that applies to me. Like, I don't know what they're trying to tell me. And because your brain just obviously with birth in general, your brain goes to a different place. But like with the magnesium and with everything that had happened, I think I was just really like, it was a little traumatic. And so I think my brain was just kind of shutting down a little bit. So I was scared, and I told them, I said, is he okay? And the midwife, I think she was just making me feel better. She's like, I think he's okay. We didn't know at that point, but they had to revive him. My husband was with him, and they're working on me because obviously pushing him out that fast, I had 2 different tears apparently. And so they're like, the midwife is fixing that up. And then my husband, they come out and they said, we're going to have to take him to the NICU. And to make sure he's okay. And because he's breathing now, but we need to make sure he's all right. And so he went a long time without oxygen, apparently, quite a long time. And so they said, we need to take him and check him out. And so they did. And while he was gone with my husband, one of the doctors came back, and I think he came back with my husband. I can't remember. But he said they're going to have to cool him on a cooling mat because he had something called, let me remember how they say it, hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. And so because he went so long without oxygen, they said his brain was damaged. And they needed to cool his body temperature because when your body is colder, the metabolism slows and all of the bodily processes slow down, and you can kind of heal. And so they said, that's the only thing we can do to give him a chance to catch up, and hopefully his brain, because babies' brains can fix themselves sometimes. And he said, that's the only thing we can do to try to help him recover from that damage. And he told us, if your baby lives, he will be brain damaged. He will not be normal. And so he came to get like the consent for that. And we were like, yeah, absolutely do that. And so they did that, and he had to be cooled to, I think they cool you to 90. I can't remember. At the time, he said they would cool him to 33 degrees, and he's talking in apparently Celsius. I was not thinking in Celsius. And so in my mind, I was like, they're going to freeze him.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
It's like, what? So, but that was my muddled brain. And my husband, being Mexican, he immediately clicked because they use Celsius. So he didn't even he took it as normal. He's like, oh yeah, he's speaking in Celsius. And then I didn't catch up. I literally didn't. This is how messed up my brain was. Even after seeing him and knowing he's not frozen, my brain still did not make the connection. Like I still was like, he doesn't feel frozen. I was just like, my brain was so messed up after all that. And so
I'm laughing. So it's not funny, but it kind of is at the same time.
Yes, because I was man. Like, and now I was like, the doctor didn't have to do that to me. He didn't have to show off that much by using Celsius because I was not in the state. You could just have used Fahrenheit, okay? Just, that's America. What we do in America. Right. Yeah. But the doctor was actually not nice. The way he worded everything and the way the midwife actually came back and apologized to me for how the doctor treated me because I was literally on the table being sewn up, and he was very, very insensitive in his delivery. And everyone else but me noticed. At the time, I was totally out of it. I was like, man, I don't know. I just didn't really pick up on it as much. And everyone else was like, no, he was really rude. And so he was not in my care though. And he seems like the kind of doctor who's probably really smart and really good at what he does, but not
no bedside manner. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, it's okay. It's fine. So they took him and they cooled his body temperature. And the whole thing, I remember, just threw me for such a loop. The whole labor, delivery, postpartum, I had pretty significant tears. I had a really bad struggle with postpartum recovery. And then in addition to that, because of being in the NICU, nursing was really rough. And so it really ended up with nothing went how I wanted or how I had dreamt or envisioned, except, getting to have a vaginal birth. That was the one thing, which I was really grateful because, obviously a C-section changes so many things.
Right.
So I was grateful for that, but nothing else was really, it was really, really was nothing else that I wanted.
Yeah.
And so it was really, really rough stuff. And so he was in the NICU for 2 weeks and they did everything they needed to do. And then they found out by the end of it all, he did not have brain damage.
Praise God.
And tons of energy over here. My 3-year-old who's to also join in over here. Totally. And they said, well, he might have brain damage, but we won't know until he starts hitting milestones and stuff like that. And he starts developing. And so we said, okay. They said, we've checked all the tests we can, but we can't tell for sure. Well, he passed every milestone ahead of time. And so everything was really, we just were completely reassured at that point. He just had no problems. And so that was my first. It was really rough. It was really hard. And it really, I guess, traumatized me for giving birth again. I was really, really scared. I felt like my body had failed me in every way. I just felt disappointed in myself. And yeah, I had a rough time with that recovery, just all of that, knowing that all of that had happened. Going into my second, I waited a little bit to be able to recover too. And then I was also really, really scared. And so I got pregnant with our second in November or December, I found out, of 2022. Yeah, that sounds right. He was due in August again of 2023. And his pregnancy was easier. I had like textbook morning sickness, but it was manageable compared to the
first time.
Yes, it was only first trimester. Like I said, textbook. It was only first trimester, and it wasn't that bad. I barely threw up. I think I only threw up once or twice, and I remember having a stomach bug. I think it was because of the stomach bug. I felt nauseated and, had some food aversions, but it was really just like, what they tell you you'll have. It's like a little bit.
Wow.
And
that's encouraging though. I feel like a lot of women who have like HG get it every time or get it worse each time. So the fact that yours was better it's just encouraging.
I expected that too, because my mom maybe had some form of HG as well with all 4 of us, because she threw up the whole 9 months with all 4 of us. And so I really expected it to go that way too, because, well, that's what my mom had. And then that's what I had the first time. So I was scared even for pregnancy, like to get pregnant again, like, how am I going to do this now that I have a baby as well, a toddler to take care of? So but I prayed. I remember praying so hard for my pregnancy to not be like that. For my pregnancy and then my labor and delivery and recovery, I was just like praying so, so hard that I would not have that same experience. And my husband and I both agreed. We're like, he knows that I still wanted a home birth. I still have that dream. And so he's like, I think we should maybe do a hospital birth without pre-eclampsia. And that way we can kind of like see how your body does, because we need to see rather than go straight to home birth again. I agreed. And so I still think, that's something that to kind of like give my body a chance to prove itself basically, or is this going to be every time, or, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
So,
did you change anything like nutritionally the second time?
Yeah, I did. I was definitely not as sick, so that helped. And then I focused more on protein. And I'd kind of read, I had looked into, because all the doctors will tell you that you can't prevent preeclampsia and they don't know what causes it. And I follow that a little bit, but then also the more natural minded people like they talk about Brewer's diet, which is hugely controversial, I think. But I didn't follow it exactly because I don't even know if I could have followed it exactly because
lot
it's a
of
lot
food.
of food. Yeah, it's a lot of food. And so, but I did try to up my protein on purpose and salt things. I tried to stay hydrated better, putting salt in my water and things like that. Just trying to be better about my nutrition. And then for a while, I did also with that pregnancy, I opted out of the glucose test and I just monitored for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so with that, I didn't have high numbers and I never got diagnosed with gestational diabetes, but I did have like a couple of borderline fasting numbers. And it was kind of confusing because I had care, which I'll get into that in a second. I had care with 2 different doctor's offices and they transferred me out of the midwife office, which this is part of, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I got differing answers on like how serious my numbers were. So I just kept monitoring it. And I think because of that, I got a little bit more strict on eating better as well and being really more higher on protein. And so that kept me more in line because I was worried about those numbers. So not that I think they were actually fine pretty much, but I had different doctors telling me different things.
Yeah.
So I wasn't, to be honest, to this day, I don't even know for sure if it was that bad, but the pregnancy was a lot smoother, which gave me so much hope. I was like, this is just, I'd never really imagined that this was possible for me. And so that really boosted, I was like, well, maybe this labor and delivery can go differently as well. I was really hopeful, praying for it so hard. I went for my 20-week anatomy scan and my husband was going to go with me. And then at the last minute, he got called to work and he couldn't come with me. So I went by myself and they did the anatomy scan and they said that there was an issue with the heart. And they said at this point, we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl because that was when we would find the little envelope and we'd do our gender reveal later. But we didn't know if he was a boy or a girl, but they said he has an issue with his heart. And the ultrasound technician put me on a video call with the MFM. They have one on call, I guess, to look at these when they are serious. And he said, because the ultrasound technician had an idea, but she's like, I don't know for sure, and I'm not allowed to say, so we have to get a doctor's opinion. And so she put me on the video call with him, and he said they were suspecting something called truncus arteriosus and a couple other heart defects that were more minor, but the main thing was the TA. And then also as well, at that point, it looked like the right side of his heart was very small. And it stayed small. And then when he was born, it was also small as well, to the point they said that it had stopped developing. So when he was born, he essentially had only half of his heart because the right side of his heart didn't even really, it was not functional. It really didn't develop. And then the left side of his heart, that's the part that had the defect. So even the side that he did have was still had a lot of struggles. And so he told me, you're probably going to have to go to Cincinnati because Cincinnati Children's Hospital is like top in the nation. So, and they said, we could deliver you here at UK, but he's going to be life flighted to Cincinnati because he's going to need open heart surgery, maybe even right after he's born. So they said, we're just going to send you to Cincinnati for your care and get you set up with them already. They were amazing. After meeting them, they gave me it's called a concierge nurse. And she walked me through everything. She made all my appointments. She told me where to go. She gave me instruction. She set me up with everything I needed, like a place for us to stay. She got us into Ronald McDonald. And so we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House, which is next door to the hospital there. And she got everything set up. And basically what we were looking at is we would have to go to Cincinnati for appointments. And then during my pregnancy. And then when he was born, we would end up being temporarily moved there while he has surgeries and recoveries. And they were projecting that he would have a total of, I believe it was 3 planned heart surgeries. And the way that his heart had problems, basically he was in palliative care from the beginning because they said some heart defects they can fix, and then it's considered a normal heart. But there's others that they can't actually fix. They can only kind of limp the heart along until they can't anymore. And they can just try to buy more years. Basically, each surgery is trying to buy more time and buy more time. And they said, so each surgery, hopefully his first one will probably be within 2 weeks of his birth. That one hopefully will get him to 6 months. He'll have another one at 6 months, and that one hopefully will get him to 2 years old. And then, there was another one. And then hopefully he doesn't have to have another one until he's an adult. And then if he needs another one after that point, he'll have to have a heart transplant.
Wow.
And they said they knew from the beginning, they said if he makes it through all of those, he will end up having a transplant. Like he will end up needing that. His heart will not last him a whole life. So we knew that going into it. And as we got further along in the pregnancy, like more was revealed about like his quality of life and different things like that he would have to deal with. And none of it was totally for certain because, when the baby is born, they can see the heart more clearly. And so maybe some things could be changed, but when he was born, it was really the same as what they had thought. And I remember at one of the meetings, one of the appointments, one of my ultrasounds, I think I was 36 weeks along. The cardiologist said that he said, I think seeing his heart, how it is, I would give him about 50% chance of surviving
birth,
of surviving beyond childhood.
Oh,
yeah. But our choice was always to fight for his life. And so as long as there was a chance for him, we wanted to take that chance. And so that was always our mindset. And I met with the surgeon, and the surgeon was the top. Like they said, everyone that was there said, you are getting the best surgeon. Literally, he used to be in Texas. They said they stole him from Texas at Cincinnati Children's, and they said he's the top. We stole him from Texas so that he could run our cardiology department, our heart surgery department here, because he's that good, and he's literally the best. So we had the best, and I met with him before the baby was born, and he said he was looking over the images and all that stuff, all the ultrasounds and things, and he said what his concern was that the left side of the heart was actually a little bit big, because when a heart struggles, it enlarges usually. And so the left side of his heart was actually getting a little bit bigger than it should, because it had to work harder. And so he said, and that pushes on the trachea because it's right behind the heart. And so he said, I'm concerned that he'll need a ventilator. And he said, I'm concerned that he might need a ventilator forever because it might always push. And then he said, and the other thing he said, I need to prepare you, is that he could be born with, he said, we see his heart and we think that it should be able to work for a little bit. He said, but there's a possibility that he could be born and it won't work at all. And he said he could be born and he could immediately go into cardiac arrest, and we won't be able to do anything because you can't do anything at that point. His heart is not compatible with life, with working. And he said, so I just want you to know that's a possibility of happening. So going into birth, we knew like he might just not make it even after birth. And going into this, I was terrified because of all of this. I actually think that everything with the baby made me focus on him more and less on myself. So I was scared for birth, but it did help a little bit because I guess it makes you less selfish when you don't have to focus on yourself. And so, I was really worried. I did try to I tried to be with midwives there, and they wouldn't let me. And I was so salty about that. I was so upset because I was like, they told me your pregnancy care is normal because you don't have any problems with you. It's just him, once he's born, he'll need very specialized care. So I was like, well, then I could be with a midwife, because as soon as he's born, then you give him to the doctors, but a midwife could deliver me. But they didn't see it that way. So they didn't. And I did a little tour of their labor and delivery. And I remember I could give birth in the children's hospital, or I could give birth in the college hospital, which was next door. The children's hospital is where he would be. So I said, I want to be there. And so that I don't have to be taken somewhere else and be away from him or whatever. In addition, less of those doctors at the children's hospital are male. And so I thought, okay, I would prefer a female. And so I will just give birth over there. And then wouldn't you know it, it was the one doctor that they had that was male was my doctor when I delivered him. And of course. And so because all the babies that come there have health problems, they do a lot of inductions. And then further, they do a lot more C-sections. So they really don't have the mindset of like natural labor. And so I was kind of trying to like ask questions during my tour and get a feel for it. And the girl goes, "No, I don't really think they do that here. Like they don't. I was like, "Well, do they do like, active labor and you can like move around and you can do this?" And she's like, "No, no, no. They don't let you get up from the bed. I think they're very strict on that." And in my mind, I was just like, well, I plan on doing whatever I want. So I was like, whatever. So I was really discouraged after that tour. I was like, they're not going to let me move. It's going to be like, this rough. I'm not going to be able to do what I want in labor and have a natural labor because they're going to be pushing me for all the interventions.
Yeah.
So I was really discouraged. And I was during this period of time, I'm just waiting in Ronald McDonald to go into labor. They had me come.
So you've already moved there.
Yes. Yeah. It's about an hour and 20 minutes from us. It's an hour and 20 minutes. So it's not like totally like not doable. It's doable, but it's for appointments and stuff. You definitely need a place to stay. And so I moved there. They wanted me to come at 36 weeks pregnant, but that was my first son's birthday, the week of his birthday. So I said, "Can I push it to 37?" And they said yes. And so I came at 37 weeks pregnant.
With your husband and your son, or just by yourself?
I moved with my husband, but he would only come on the weekends. The plan was for him to come on the weekends while he wasn't working. And then my mom came and stayed with me and my son during the week. And so because the Ronald McDonald allows you to have certain people that you can stay with you and things like that. So I moved into Ronald McDonald and I was essentially just waiting to go into labor. So I was about 37 weeks and he was born at 38 weeks and 4 days. And I was just waiting. I was really praying for natural labor, natural delivery. An easier recovery would be nice. But I was really praying for no pre-eclampsia and anything like that. And nothing ever came back as flagging for pre-eclampsia. So I got a little bit swollen, I remember. And, but it was July and August.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was pretty normal. And it wasn't ever really bad. And then none of my blood pressures came back bad. I was really, really good on all of that. I remember feeling good. Actually, I remember feeling good at the end of pregnancy and just really being able to move around and just, I was really excited to meet him. So at 38 weeks, I don't know, a couple of days before he was born, the 2 nights before he was born, I had contractions. And just when they would start getting intense enough to where I would think it was going somewhere, it would be dawn and they would go away. Just like the sun would rise and they would go away. And I would have a normal day of having like 3 contractions the entire day long and nothing. And so I just thought this is just prodromal labor, I suppose. So this could go on I'm only 38 weeks and 3 days or whatever at that point. And so this could go on until I'm 40 weeks. I really wasn't anticipating that it was labor.
Yeah.
That it was early labor, but I think it was early labor looking back. And so I just kind of ignored it. And I just tried to sleep as best as I could through those contractions during the night and then walk as much as I could during the day. And so I did that for 2 days. And then the third night, I just settled in. I was like, this is going to happen again. So I'll just try to settle in and go to sleep. We went to bed late that night. And I remember we went to bed at midnight or 1. And this was a weekend. So my husband was there. And so it was a Monday night. He was able to stay for the Monday after his weekend because the job they were doing, he works in construction. And it was outside at the time and it was raining. And so he's like, well, I don't need to go to work today because it's raining. So I'm not going to be able to do the job. So he stayed with me in Cincinnati for an extra day. And I kept joking. I was like, well, I'm going to have the baby and I'm going to make you stay for longer. And you're not going to be going back to that job. And he would laugh, but then that's what happened. So that Monday night we went to bed and my mom was there. And so I laid down and I tried to go to sleep. And I remember being almost asleep and then getting a contraction and thinking, wow, that's a pretty intense contraction. I timed it. I have been timing them or whatever. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to lay down and go back to sleep because it, hasn't been doing anything this whole time. So went back to sleep and then woke up to another one. I don't think I actually woke up. I was not really sleeping, but I woke up to another one and it was like 7 minutes later, another contraction and I felt a pop and just the tiniest amount of liquid. And I was like, okay, so that might have been my water. So I went I got up and went to the bathroom, and there was bloody show, and there really wasn't that much liquid. So I was like, I don't know if that was just my water or if it was just bloody show. I don't really know. And then I thought, well, if it's my water, I'll keep leaking, right? So I'll
Right.
go back to bed. So I went back to bed and had another contraction, and I felt it push water. And so I was like, okay, that's my water problem. I'm like almost 100% sure that's my water. And the contractions were intense, but nothing, like what I would consider unbearable. And so I was like, well, I was really mad. Actually, I was really upset that it had started with my water breaking, because I knew once I went in there, I was like, they're going to put me on a clock and they're going to say, you have to have the baby by 24 hours, or else they're going to want to do Pitocin, and they're going to want to do this, or they're going to want to do that. And so I was actually really mad that my water had broken at the beginning. And so I was like, this is specifically what I did not want. And so I was kind of stalling to go into the hospital, which is just next door. And I was like, well, let me take a shower. That way I feel nice and clean before we go. And then I'll just bounce on the ball for a little bit. And my husband was like, that's fine. We'll go when you feel like, you need to go. And so I kind of just was waiting it out to see where the contractions went. If I had regular, I was so scared of going to the hospital and my contractions disappearing, because I had never had them be natural. I had never had non-induction
Non-Pitocin contractions.
So I was like, I don't know how my body can do this, So I just hung out for a while, and I was bouncing on the ball, and eventually my contractions got to the point where I was getting dizzy, and I felt like, whoa, that's like really weird. And so I was like, yeah, I think we should go. So we went. My husband went and got a wheelchair. He wheeled me over to the hospital, and the nurses. It was really funny because when we went in, my husband is wheeling me in the wheelchair, and we roll into the labor and delivery unit, and the nurses at the desk, they're just like all hanging around the desk, and they all stood up and looked at us, and they're like, "Can we help you?" And I was like, "Yeah, well, I think my water might have broken, and I might be in labor." And they're like, okay. And so they're like, all of them are like rushing around. Apparently it was a very slow night. And they said, we weren't expecting you because nobody ever does nobody comes in natural labor. Like everyone here gets induced.
Gets induced, right.
So they were like, we were totally shocked. And so it was really funny to see the look on their face, because they did not know. They just were not expecting it. And they had actually wanted me to be induced. The doctors for me wanted me to be induced because they're more medicalized. And so they were all like, well, we need to know the day that he's coming, and we need to know exactly how this is going to go down. And I refused. And I said no. And then I had more reason to back it up, because the cardiologist for the baby said, no, the longer he stays in your stomach, the better, because he gets a better chance of developing. So let him come when he wants to come. And so they said, an induction would probably be harder for him. And so I had even more reason. I was like, well, the cardiologist for the baby said that's not good. So that's even more reason not to induce. So they had kind of they had scheduled me one, which was funny. It was for the next week. But he came at 38 weeks and 4 days. And I told them, you can schedule it for me, but don't tell me what day it is. So they quickly got me into a room, and they got me settled in. They came and did the test to see if my water had broken, and they said it did. And when they checked me when I got in, I was 4 centimeters along and I think 80% effaced, which we had waited from the time that I felt my water break. It had been about an hour. So I don't think I got to 4 centimeters within that hour, considering the contractions were not that rough. I think the last 2 nights of contractions probably were doing something.
Yeah.
So that just reminded me of like, no labor is false labor. Like it was doing something.
Yeah.
So we got there, and the doctor was, the OBGYN was a woman. She came in and she checked, and she's like, yeah, you're 4 centimeters. And I was again bummed out because I wanted to be into active labor by the time I got to the hospital. And so she's like, well, you're a stretchy 4. I would say you're almost a 5. So I was like, okay. So, I was very happy to find that the nurses were spectacular, and they were amazing in that all of the stuff that I had heard about, like, no, they don't let you move around. It was not true. None of it. They were so nice. They let me move around. They just followed me around. I did have to be on the monitor, but they basically gave me intermittent fetal monitoring because they let me move around so much. And she would just come in and she'd say, okay, we need a couple more minutes on the monitor, and then have it on there and then come back. And it was really, really calm. They were kind. They were very supportive. If I needed anything that was like natural. So anything I needed that, you want this kind of ball, a birthing ball, you want this, you want that, all of this stuff. So I ended up laboring around the room, just kind of trying to change positions often, a little bit in the bathroom, on the birth ball, but I'm pretty tall. And so the birth ball, I think, was too short for me. And so it actually scared me when I sat down. I almost fell because it was so short. And so I didn't do much laboring on there, a little bit on the rocking chair that they had. Well, by this time, my mom was with me and my husband was with me. And I had a playlist of hymns, which if I ever hear that list now, it just takes me back to that birth, giving birth to Gabriel. I remember one point sitting on the bed. I was sitting up, but I was kind of leaning on my side, and I was clutching the side of the hospital bed because this was at the end. Well, the new doctor came in because it was shift change, and it was a man. I was so, it's all right. I don't think that they have to be a bad doctor just because they're a man, but I prefer for my care to be by a woman in that area. So I was just kind of thinking, of course, I chose this hospital because it has less male doctors and I get the one male doctor. And I knew right away that I didn't feel comfortable with the way he carried himself. He spoke in a condescending manner, and he didn't ask for permission for anything. He would tell me, I'm going to check you and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And so it really rubbed me the wrong way from the beginning. And I knew I didn't prefer his manner of handling, in addition to the fact that I didn't want to be delivered by a man. So he was like that. And I, after talking about it later, my husband said he got the same feeling. My mom said she got the same feeling. It was all just the way he was not. The nurses told us later on, we found out, they were like, yeah, he's not the favorite doctor around here, but he's retiring soon. So we're just waiting until he retires.
Oh, gosh.
So yes. Yeah. And he checked me, and I remember him just being very rough, and he made me, where the other ones, all the other cervical checks I've ever had, they work with you on what position you're in. Like, he told me that I had to be on my back, and that he made me sit on it's like it's not a pillow because it's hard plastic, but it goes under your lower back to raise that area more. It's horrible when you're having a contraction. It's horrible. And he told me he couldn't check me unless I was in that position. So I did. I went along with it. And the whole time I'm thinking, I don't want to go along with this. And so he checked me, and I believe I was about 7 or 8 centimeters along, and I was 100% effaced. So I was right there, and I was so over the moon that I was 7 centimeters, because shift change was at 7 a.m. And so I had gotten there at 4 a.m. And so I was already 7 centimeters. I was over the moon. I was like, this is it. We're doing this. I'm already made it. Like, I couldn't believe it. And for it to happen that fast, I was just so shocked. And so I was so excited, and my feelings of not liking him kind of like just faded to the back because I was so excited that I had gotten that far. So at this point, he left. I had a couple more contractions, and then at one point I said, okay, I want the nurse to check me. And she said, well, I can check you, and I can check you for his station and see if he's dropped. And I said, okay. Well, I wouldn't move the position I was in. I did not want to move. I was so scared of moving. And so they said, well, I'll just check you and see his station. Well, he was right there. He was a 0.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. He was right. He was really low. He wasn't out yet, obviously, but he was really low. He was as low as you can be without being out. And so she said, and they were all telling me that I had 2 nurses, because she was training a new nurse, not new to nursing, but new to that unit. And so I had 2 of them. So one was essentially all on the monitor doing all that, and the other one was just coaching me through everything, and like how to breathe and how to do this, and very like with me. And I loved her for that. She was amazing. And she was a godsend as well, because she was actually from a birth center. And so she said, yes. So she had all the natural, like point of view and all of that. So she kind of like, we just vibed very well. She knew what I wanted without me having to tell her. And so that really was just such a godsend. And so she was helping me with all of that. And she was telling me, if you moved, he would just come down. If you move, he'll just come down and and he'll be born. And I knew that. And in my mind, I was so scared of pushing. I don't know why I was specifically scared of pushing, but I was afraid of him getting stuck or like something crazy. And so I was just like, no, I don't want to move. And that's why I didn't want to move, because I knew I could feel him. I knew he was going to be born if I just moved a little bit.
What position were you in?
I was still clutching the side of the hospital bed. I was the bed was sitting up. So I was sitting up, but I was leaning on my side, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't move. Everyone was trying to get me to move. My husband, my mom, all of them are like, just move, honey. Just go any position you want and he'll come. It was very apparent that he would just be born if I would just move a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't. And then all of a sudden I had a contraction and my body shot me out of the bed and made me stand up. And to this day, I don't know what that was, but my body just like, I shot out of the bed and I was like, I have to stand up. I like yelled it. I have to stand up. And they were like, okay, that's fine. So I stood up and then my husband and the nurse came around to the side so I could lean on them so I could be steady. So I'm leaning on them and I kept saying, I can't do this. I can't do it. I don't think I can do this. And they were like, yes, you can. You are doing it. You're at the end. This was literally at the end. And so I turned around and they raised the bed so I could lean, like I could put my hands on it. I leaned my hands on the bed. And I remember the nurse kept her hand under there because she was afraid that he would be born like just while I was standing up there. And so I had a contraction and I just said, I remember feeling his head, just something with his head. And I just remember screaming at his head. And the nurse goes, yeah, that's his head. I can feel his hair. I can see his hair and I can feel his hair. And I was like, okay, I'm getting back in the bed now. Because I did not want to be born. I didn't want to be born over the floor, and like fall or something. So because they're slippery. So I just got back in the bed on my hands and knees. They called the OBGYN back in and he came in. And this was where technically it took a bad turn because he comes in and he says, okay, looks like baby's going to be born. I need you to get on your back, turn around and get on your back. And that way you can push and I can offer you perennial support. And I didn't want to push on my back. I had already decided I wanted to push on my hands and knees. I already knew that I wanted that. And so I said, no, I don't want to push on my back. And this was, mind you, like through a contraction at the very end when he's about to be born. It's very intense. It's hard to speak when you're at that point.
Yeah.
And so I said, no, I would not like that. And he said, you have to. He said, you have to push on your back. And I knew the words that I needed to say to just say no to him. And so I just did. I said, I will not turn around and push on my back. And I do not want you to offer me perennial support. And I wasn't facing him. Obviously, I was on my hands and knees. And my mom and my husband said he sat down on the little stool they sit on that spins, he sat down in his little chair and he spun around to face away from me and crossed his arms and sat there.
Like a child.
Yes, like a child. Yes, like a child. And they said he was fuming. He was absolutely fuming and he was just pouting. He was pouting that I said no to him. And the nurse, which my nurse was amazing. And she told me, she said, don't listen to him. You don't have to get on your back. You do what you want to do. And I was like, and my husband was like, you don't have to do that. Don't do that. And so everyone was just like, you don't have to do that. And it was funny because there was so to receive the baby, the NICU team had to be there too. So there was 8 to 10 doctors and they have those rooms set up to where there's an extra big area for the baby. So it's a huge room. And so there's 8 to 10 doctors readying the little thing for the baby and getting everything ready. And they said when I told him no, and that I would not get on my back, they said the whole room got quiet and all of the doctors over there stopped what they were doing and turned around to see what was going to happen. And the doctor he didn't do anything. He didn't deliver the baby. After that, he just sat there the whole time. And which I was fine with, because after that I was like, well, I don't want you delivering my baby. I'm fine with you not delivering my baby after all. So and it was literally, he was born in 12 minutes. It was only 3 pushes because my contractions spaced out I know it was only 3 contractions and he was born in 12 minutes. So I know that it was 4 minutes apart, the contractions. And I felt like I didn't have to push him. It was complete fetal ejection reflex. I felt like I had to hold him back because I was trying to not tear. So I was trying to hold him back and he just came out. And the nurse, who was so amazing, helping me through everything, she I guess they said that I thought she caught him, but they said she really didn't catch him. She just directed him, and then I caught him on my hands and knees. And I thought she had actually grabbed him before and handed him to me, but really, I guess that was him being born into my hands. And he came out crying, pink. They said he wouldn't, he might be blue because of his heart defect too. He was pink, and we did delayed cord clamping as much as we could, because they said that would be better for him too, as well, in addition to the benefits I wanted already, but especially with his heart. And so they let us do that for a bit, and then he cried right away. I always thought it was ironic because our first baby without a heart defect or anything, his APGAR was 0. And then this one with severe heart defects, his APGAR was 8. And so, yeah, he was amazing at the start. He was just like, he came out crying and pink and like just all of the things that you want a baby to be at the beginning. And so they did take him pretty quickly because they had to check him. And I really wanted to do as much skin to skin and then to be able to nurse him if I could. Well, they did let me do some skin to skin. He needed to have like different IVs and different things placed right away. But they wouldn't let me nurse. He wanted to, he tried to, which my first never did. Because I guess being in the NICU, my first never really tried to nurse. And he was just, I mean, I couldn't hold him until he was 5 days old, my first one, because he was on the cooling mat. So I think that affected it too. It affected bonding, all of that. So I was really adamant this time. I want skin to skin. I want a bond. I want all of that because I know it affected me very negatively last time, not being able to bond with him. I didn't know that it was going to, but it did very bad. So I was very adamant that I wanted as much skin to skin as I could. And yeah, they actually let me follow him over to the room they took him in. They were going to place a line in his belly button. And they said, we'll let you have some skin to skin before we place that line, because it'll be a lot harder after the line is in his belly button because you have to be very careful not to move it or anything. Also, they helped him with his breathing a little bit, but they said he was pretty good on his breathing at first. So we made it through the time frame where the surgeon had said he might not be compatible with life. So we made it through that. And then it was just after that, it was just waiting for a surgery day. And as far as the labor and delivery, though, was worlds better. It was a dream compared to my first. It was actually something I thought was impossible for me. So I was absolutely on cloud 9 after that. I could not believe that I had done it naturally. I just didn't think, part of me still thought I'm not going to get to have that. I'm not going to be able to do that, or this will go south and I'll have a C-section. And so I was just in awe. I was really in awe that God had answered my prayers so much, like so well, like it was just amazing. And so, I mean, his labor was 5 hours from the time my water broke to the time he was born. He was born at 8:22 a.m. It was like 5 hours.
That's fast.
And it was just amazing. He was also my biggest baby to date, which is not even that big, but he was 7 pounds, 8 ounces. So he's been my biggest baby. He wasn't my easiest to push. He was easier to push than my first. And I only had one tear that time. And so it was a lot easier to recover, just way better. So yeah, with him, I pumped. And because they wouldn't let me nurse, they're not allowed to have anything in their stomachs before surgery because they can get an infection from it. He wanted to nurse, though. He tried. When they let me do that skin to skin, he did try. And I almost had him latched. And then they were like, no, you can't do that. And so looking back, I don't think he really would have gotten that much to be able to be an issue. But they didn't want to because if they have anything in their stomach, it can cause a life-threatening infection once they go to surgery. So they don't allow that. He had his surgery at 6 days old, and he had a really, really hard time with the surgery. And he went in his surgery was at 7 a.m., I believe. And he was supposed to be out. I think the whole thing was supposed to be 6 to 8 hours long, I believe is what they said. And he didn't end up getting out until midnight or 1 a.m. of that day, of that night.
Wow.
So surgery for, I think it was 14 or 16 hours, somewhere in there. It was a very long time.
Wow.
And while he was in surgery, they put them on the heart-lung machine, the bypass machine, to run their bodies while they're working on everything. And then obviously they have to remove them. When they would try to remove him, the surgery that they were attempting was successful. The operation that they meant to do was successful. So then they would try to come off of the machine, and they couldn't figure out why when they would try to come off the machine, his body would crash. He wouldn't be able to, his stats would plummet, and he was dying essentially. They'd have to put him right back on the machine. That happened. They did that. I think it was about 10 times, 10 to 12 times. I think they tried to take him off the machine and it wouldn't work. And so the whole day essentially was just trying to get him off of the heart-lung machine. And his body couldn't, for whatever reason, they didn't understand why. And so they did say after he was out, he said the problem of his heart being big on the left side and pushing on his trachea, he ended up saying, yeah, that wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it was. It wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be. And I actually fixed it a little bit. So it's not a problem at all. So that was not a concern after that point. But when he went in, he saw that he had very high pulmonary hypertension, which is like high blood pressure in the lungs. And so he said, I wasn't expecting that. So that was an added complication because it's a hard thing for them to deal with, I guess. To this day, I don't understand all of it. But it complicated his recovery. So he ended up, because he couldn't come off the bypass machine, he had to go on a machine called ECMO. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember what ECMO stands for. It's a really long name. But it's a life support machine, basically. But we were in awe because once we saw him on the ECMO machine, which is very difficult, he looked very different. Going from looking like a normal baby to afterwards, he was very swollen because of the medications being put into his body. And then he looked very bruised. He looked like a much bigger baby because he had so much extra fluid from all the medicine. And his body was bruised. They couldn't close his chest at first, so they had to leave it open. And so they leave it open and they seal it with it's like cellophane kind of. And so you can kind of see through it a little bit. You could see his heart beating in there on the inside. So he was on the ECMO machine, and the machine is huge. It's like, we were just amazed at how the machine filled the whole room, and that was all to run his life. Something that God does effortlessly for all of us is to keep us all alive and give us our next breath. And this machine takes up the entire room, and it can't even do it properly because there's complications from that machine. It gives you seizures. It can give you strokes. The longer you're on it, the worse it is for you because it's not your body's right way. You can get infections. You can die from being on the machine. It's life-saving, but you can die just from being on it because it's not God. It just doesn't match. It doesn't live up to it. So he was on that for, I think he was on it for 9 days, I believe. I think he was on, that sounds right. 9 days on ECMO. And then they were finally able to get him off, which was a big step in the right direction. So he came off at about 9 days, and we were surprised. Actually, they were all surprised that he came off because the way he had looked, it was very rough. They suspected he might not be able to come off. So but he did. And from there, it was just getting his body to recover from the surgery. And from all of what they call bypass runs when they would try to take him off. And so they tried to get him to recover. They were really concerned about his kidneys. And in the end, that's kind of what he struggled with the most, was his kidneys, because his kidneys shut down when he was in surgery. And that's pretty common, actually. They were expecting it because your kidneys of the body, they're kind of the weakest of all the organs. They said they're the first to tap out when something goes wrong in the body, and they're the last ones to recover from anything. They're kind of just, I think they called them lightweights. They're very like, they're not strong. And so they expected his kidneys to struggle. And so they already kind of knew that, and he would be on dialysis. But the struggle after he came off ECMO was that every dialysis is different. And every machine had some kind of complication that he couldn't his body couldn't handle. And so they would switch machines, and it was just kind of a back and forth. And one of them would work for a little bit, and then something would go wrong, and he would start bleeding, and hemorrhaging. And then the other one, his kidneys wouldn't accept it. There was always something wrong. His body wouldn't accept the dialysis machines. And so that was the struggle. Once he was out of his surgery, he made some small steps, sometimes, but they were really like short-term things. Overall, his health was getting worse. And the big thing that he could not come back from was his kidneys. And so he fought for a couple more weeks. And then he was a month and 2 days old when he passed away. And they said, they would ask us, and we'd have conversations with like palliative care and with doctors. And at a certain point, the conversation has to be whether or not you're taking care of him or if you're doing things to him. And so our stance was always, as long as he has a chance, we want to fight for his life. Until God steps in and makes it apparent, then we want to fight for his life every chance we could. My husband, it's hard because my husband and I, now knowing that he didn't make it, it's hard to know what he went through. And my husband has said, if I had known that no matter what, he wasn't going to make it, then I wouldn't have let him go to surgery. And I would have kept him like that, so that he wouldn't have to go through that. And then we would just have the time that we had. But he said we didn't know that, obviously, at the time. And so not being God, we can't take that into our own hands. We have to try to fight for the life that God gave us as long as we can. And it's up to God at the end of the day for each of us to give us more life, to wake us up the next day. And so, he passed away, and they would ask us, they're very kind, and they had conversations around, what would you want it to look like? How do you want it to go? When he does pass, is there anything you would want? And you don't know until that. It's not like anyone ever thinks of that,
Yeah.
And so I just knew at that time, I said, the only thing I want is that I want to hold him, when he passes. But I was very scared. I was actually terrified of holding him. I had only held him a handful of times, and that was pre-surgery. After his surgery, I didn't hold him again because he had too much. I wasn't allowed. His chest was open.
Tubes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're not allowed to. And so, I said, I want to hold him when he passes, but I was very scared of that. And I told my husband, I said, I don't know that I'm strong enough to do that. I don't know. Like, I know that I have to, because I know that I'll regret it if I don't. I will regret the rest of my life if I don't do that. But I don't think I can. Like, I don't know how I could possibly do that. And I said, I don't know that I can stay calm, to be able to do that. But I knew that I needed to do that, to hold him. And I was praying for God to give me the strength to hold him. And I remember there's a little devotional that I read a long time ago, and it talks about a preacher who, it's a long time ago. I think it's in the 1800s, a preacher from that time frame. And he had lost a child, and he said that he was praying, and he was in someone's house. He was a guest in someone's house because they traveled in those days. And he was praying, and he happened to look up, from where he was kneeling beside the bed, and he looked up, and they had a sampler, one of the old-fashioned samplers on the wall, and it was a verse, my grace is sufficient for thee. And the way that they had colored the sampler was they had highlighted the word is. And he said that as he was praying through that, he realized he was begging God for strength. And then he became convicted by looking at that and realizing it says is. It doesn't say will be. It says that it is sufficient for you right now. It's present tense. And so that means that whatever you're facing right now, that his grace is sufficient for that. And so that came to my mind, and I realized that it was true. And I became convicted, like, okay, God will give me the grace and the strength to do that then. And so the night before he passed away, I remember for the past couple of days of his life, we knew that it was the end, and we were just spending time with him and having family come and meet him that hadn't met him yet, and just making the most of those last couple of days. And so we knew it was the end. We just had our family there visiting. And the night before he passed away, I told my husband that I said, something feels different. And I said, I feel like I can feel the angel of death is here. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be tomorrow. I can feel that death is here. And the next day, everything was the same. His numbers were the same. They had said he would probably decline and his numbers would start to go down, because you never think about this, but how long does it take someone to die? And when, if you're wanting to hold him, how do you know when the time is right? And so how do you know that it won't be so fast you'll miss it? Or, when do you know? And they said his numbers on the screen would go down, his blood pressure, his heart rate, all of his numbers would slowly go down, and they would make sure he's comfortable. They would make sure that he's comfortable through that process. And so this was a Sunday. He passed away on a Sunday, and the morning was fine. He was normal. And then that afternoon, his numbers started declining, and we knew. And my family was there. My husband's family was there. My dad was on his way. My dad was driving because my dad's a preacher. And so my dad had preached in the morning. And so he was driving from I'm from Ohio. So from where I'm from in Ohio. And he was driving, and I remember they have like a family room that you can meet with. And I was eating something. I think I was eating some food for a couple of moments. And then my husband came in. I think he came and told me his numbers have dropped since you left. Even just since you left the room, they've dropped. So I came back. As soon as I came back, the nurses prepped me for holding him. And I knew that was the moment. And I remember one of them telling me that he would be comforted by me holding him when he passed away. And so that was in my mind as well. And I wanted to be composed. I didn't want to lose it for that moment. And so I was praying for that. And I realized that God, his grace is sufficient. That's the thing that I learned from that, is that his grace is enough for whatever. Even holding your baby as they die, his grace is enough for everything. So I held him, and we sang to him, and just talked to him. And he passed away, I think it was 3:47 in the afternoon on a Sunday, and September 17th. And everyone says that time heals. And that's something that I've thought of before this as well. Like, once time passes, you'll feel better. And I actually, in this case, I mean, I guess for me, I don't think that has happened. I think that actually, as time has gone on, time makes it feel worse for me. It's more separation. And so I really think that God heals. And I don't think that time heals. I think that if anything, time seems a little cruel, because it just, no matter how much you don't want it to go on, it does. It's not going to stop just because you want to be closer to your baby. But what we have found is that God does heal. And, as much as we prayed for him, God did heal him. He just healed him in a different way than what we were expecting and what we desired. And now he's healthy and whole and perfect, and never feeling any more pain ever for the rest of eternity. And so that gives us such peace and consolation, knowing that he'll never feel pain and that we'll get to see him again. That's another thing that we have said so many times. We don't understand how people go through this without God or without Jesus, because if we had no faith and we didn't know that we would also go to heaven ourselves, that would be inconsolable. There's just after losing your baby, there's no hope after that of seeing them. That's the number one thing that got us through, is we'll get to see him again. We'll be reunited. Because of our faith in Jesus Christ, we know that we'll someday as well be in heaven. And so I don't know how people go through that without Jesus. And it makes sense why there's so many people who, if they lose children, if they don't have that faith, if they don't have salvation, then they don't have any promise of seeing their baby again, then there's no hope after that. There's no hope of a good life, of going on, of moving on, of anything after that. So yeah, so that was really big for us. And I told my husband, I said, everything in me wanted a baby, all my hormones, everything is really even physically, my body was ready for a baby. And now it's empty. It doesn't have a baby. And I said, even if I was pregnant right this very second, waiting 9 months to have another baby feels like an eternity. And it feels like I couldn't even do it. And it wasn't really the idea of replacing. It's really just the idea of my body, just as a woman, you want a baby, and postpartum, your body just was so ready for that. And this time was, it was a lot easier of a recovery. And so this baby came quickly after him. And so, which was a consolation as well, to know that we had another blessing to look forward to. And my third baby, completely different story. We got pregnant quickly, and he was due July. He was due in July, this past July.
All these summer babies for you.
Yeah, I know. And I've told my husband, I'm like, I don't want a summer baby anymore. I've had enough of being in the third trimester in the summer.
Yeah.
So that's just my own that's my own personal thing. We'll see how the future goes, but I was like, I'm over that one. I'm over that big time. But I think if it was the dead of winter, it would also be difficult to be third trimester because you get so many layers, and then you're probably itchy. Like I don't know. I didn't have itchiness until my third as well. And I was thinking, if I had to be wearing, like tights and, layers and stuff, I would be so miserable. But yeah, he was due July, all summer babies. He ended up coming in June. So I've had a June baby, a July baby, and an August baby. So this pregnancy was even better, even easier than the second.
Wow.
No morning sickness at all. Like, I even was waiting out the first trimester and into the second trimester, wondering if I truly was pregnant, because I really had no morning sickness. I was tired. I remember being tired, but nothing, not even one bout of nausea at all. Nothing, like no food aversions, nothing at all. Like I never dreamed that was even possible. So that was a big answered prayer as well. During this, our house was under a pretty intense phase of renovation. So he had to replace the roof and everything. So it was kind of intense for a while during this pregnancy. So that affected some of how it went for me, because it was a little harder to cook because we didn't have our kitchen for a while. So that was part of that. But it was, as far as like how I felt, I was feeling really good. The longer it went, I did feel worse. But I think it was because I did end up getting pre-eclampsia again. And he was born at 36 weeks and 6 days. And I had been taking my blood pressure a couple of times at home, and it wasn't high, but it was a little higher than I was used to. And so I was worried about it, which wasn't making it any better. And so I was monitoring it, and I let my midwives know, and they said, well, it's not high, so we're not concerned about it. And but I knew that it was abnormal for me.
Were you planning a home birth for the third one?
No, I wasn't planning a home birth this soon after the other one. It wasn't on the radar. It was a lot easier financially, and just scheduling wise to also do another hospital birth. And I also love the midwives over there too. So we were still going with the hospital this time, and the numbers ended up going up to high range. And so my husband, one night but I had been worried about them too. And so and I had a wrist cuff. So I wasn't even sure if it was accurate. I was kind of like not completely sure. I was definitely worried. So I know that was making it higher. And my husband said, I think that we should go. He got to the point, he said, I think we should go have it checked out. And he said, if you don't have it, then we can rest easy and we can go on and it's fine. But he said, but if you do have it, then we should catch it as soon as possible. And I was really fighting it because I did not want to go to the hospital. And I knew it wasn't going to be good in the hospital, and then it's going to spiral. I felt immediate flashbacks to my first, when everything started spiraling out of control. And so I was really, really scared. Even him bringing up going to the hospital, I started crying. I was like, I can't, it's just going to be out of my control, and it's going to go the same direction. I'm not going to be able to do anything about it. And I'm terrified of that. I can't do that again.
Yeah.
And so finally he convinced me that it was better to go because, preeclampsia is serious if I do have it. And so I agreed, but by this point it was late at night. So he said, let's go to sleep and get a little bit of sleep. And then if you do have it, we're going into this on sleep and not going in the middle of the night. So we slept, went in the morning. And at first my blood pressure, they laid me down on my left side. At first my blood pressure, well, the first one they took was really bad. The first reading was really bad. I said, just sit me down for a minute. Let me calm down. It'll go down. And it did. And once I was laying down, my numbers were perfect. And it was amazing. We thought we were going to leave. And the midwife thought we were going to leave too. She said, I think that you're probably anxious about this, and that's why it's going up.
Yeah.
We're waiting on my labs, and they had to wait a really long time for my labs. And the midwife said, I think your labs are going to come back fine because it seems like your blood pressure is perfect. It was literally picture perfect the whole time I was laying there. The whole time waiting on labs, perfect. And she went and got my labs finally, and she came back and she said, I hate to tell you this, and she had asked me, what are you most afraid of? And I said, I am most afraid of being induced with magnesium again. I am terrified of that. Something tells me if I had to be induced without magnesium, it might be easier because it's my third baby now. But if I have to have magnesium, this is what I told her. I said, that is the end of the world for me. I just can't go through that again. I'm not strong enough. I literally am not strong enough to do that. And so she said, well, at that time she was like, well, your numbers look really good. So I think you might have a chance of being okay. And so it was a couple of hours waiting on labs. And when they came back, she said, I am sorry to have to tell you this, but you're going to have to be induced, and you'll have to have magnesium too, because it was severe. When I get preeclampsia, I don't get it just like mild. I get it like severe, like we have to have the baby right now and you have to go on magnesium right now because you might have a stroke. Like that's like, the numbers are already so bad. And so she said, like for my kidneys, she said anything over 200 is considered preeclampsia, and your kidneys came back at 1200. So yeah, my numbers were really bad. And so they took me, they got me set up again with a room and all that stuff. And I was absolutely terrified again, even though I told her, I said, I've done natural birth without an epidural, with no medication, nothing. And I am more scared of being induced than to go through it without medication or anything. I'm terrified of being induced. And so every step of the way, every intervention that I had to have, I was so scared. But through this, each time I had one of those, it went better than I thought it was going to. And God was just taking care of me every step of the way. And I didn't see it at the time. I was terrified at the time, but he was there each step of the way. Each intervention has the risk of taking you a different direction that you don't want to go. And so I had to have another Foley bulb. It went better than last time, although those are still not fun. It was still not fun to have it. It's not my favorite thing. It feels unnatural is the best way I could describe it. It feels very unnatural. And so they gave me Cytotec this time. I could feel my body wanting to kick into labor. I would feel the contractions kind of start up and then they would fizzle out. And that was the magnesium fighting it. That was the magnesium going against it. And I think my body, if I had just been induced without magnesium, it would have gone in right away, because I could feel from the very time they put the Foley bulb in, my body was getting contractions, but they would kind of calm down, and I could feel I knew it was the magnesium after it had happened several times. I was like, I know this is magnesium, just stamping out the fire. And I was telling my husband every time, I was telling him, I can't do this. I can't do this. The contractions I had were not terrible, but I was terrified of having magnesium and going through like active labor, transition, pushing, all of that. So the magnesium, I was also terrified in and of itself because it makes you feel so horrible. And so we were praying that it would be easier, that in and of itself. And so I had it, and I could tell the moment they put it in, it makes me feel terrible. I was like, that's the magnesium, isn't it? Because you get a weird taste in your mouth. You start feeling hot. And so I knew that was the magnesium as soon as I started feeling that way. And she goes, oh yeah, I just pushed it through your IV. And I was like, yep, I know. But I noticed this time, which normally with magnesium, you have to be on a bedside commode, right? Like because you're a fall risk. You're not supposed to be able to move around or stand, walk. You're not supposed to be allowed to do that. And with my first, I did that, but it's extremely hard. And I said, I had to go to the bathroom. And I said, I'm going to go to the bathroom. If somebody could just help me, but I'm going to go there. I'm not going to do the bedside. Because the nurse goes, oh, yeah, there's going to be a bedside commode. I was like, no, 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 no. I said, unless I pass out on the way to the bathroom this time, I'm going to go to the real bathroom. Because I said, I've done this before and I just need to just do that on my own.
Yeah.
And so I was like, if I understand if I do pass out, okay, fine, that's fine. I'll use the bedside commode after that. But like, I'm going to walk. And so I stood up and I walked and I felt better after I walked. I felt like almost normal, like standing up. I was like, this is amazing. I was not expecting this. So the only problem though was that it takes all of your strength. And so by standing up and doing that, I felt so tired. I literally had to lay down again after that. And for me, it felt worse when I was laying down this time. So they started the induction at 5 p.m. on a Sunday. And then they started with a Foley bulb. And then that came out around 10:30 that night. The nurse pulled it out and that got me to a 5. But the midwife, and I knew this instinctively too, just by the way my body felt, she said, you're technically at a 5, but she said, it's a manual 5. We did that to you. And so your body doesn't quite know that you're 5 centimeters. And I knew that because my contractions were not. I wasn't really having contractions. And so I was like, I figured because my body is not, hormonally, my body does not realize I'm at 5 centimeters.
Yeah.
So we were just hoping that my body would kick in from there. That was always the hope, that my body would take it from there and we could avoid Pitocin. And then somewhere in that night, I wanted my water broken, but the midwife kind of said, she said, well, that might make it more intense. And I know you wanted to do without an epidural. So I don't know if you want to do that now. And so it kind of did give me a little bit of doubt. I was like, oh yeah, maybe she's right. And this whole time I'm scared too, because I haven't been induced without an epidural. I did natural labor without an epidural, but now I'm still like, can I do this without an epidural?
It's different. Mm-hmm.
Because it's different. And it's now having had it is more painful. It's more painful to be induced. For me, it has been than natural labor. And so I was definitely like, didn't want an epidural, but I was terrified that it was going to get so intense that I would give in. I was very scared of that. And so I didn't get my water broken the night, but then by the morning it had gone nowhere. I really didn't have contractions. And I was like, well, I would prefer that to Pitocin. So it was a new midwife. She was amazing. Both of them were amazing. And the new one, I was like, well, I think I want my water broken. She broke my water and I didn't really notice it do anything either. I was really just not, the magnesium was, the longer you're on it, the more it's in your system. And I think the more it's even harder. And so we broke the water. This was like 8 a.m. the next day. Nothing really came of it. By the time it was noonish or 1 o'clock, I was like, okay, we're going to have to do Pitocin because I was also scared. Now my water is broken. Now I'm on a time. Yeah. So we have to get this going. And so they gave me Pitocin. I said, just start me off with the lowest dose. Because again, I was terrified of Pitocin as well. So just start me off with the lowest dose. And they started me off with the lowest dose. I was, again, my whole demeanor, my whole attitude was, I can't do this. I can't do this. I was telling my husband the whole time, I can't do it. I apologized later to him because I felt like I was whining. I apologized while I was doing it. I think I'm whining. I know I'm whining. I just can't do this. I know I can't. And then this was the Lord because I prayed for strength again because I was like, I'm not strong enough for this. I'm not. And so I prayed for strength. And at one point, I think I either played it on my phone or I had my mom play it. I don't remember. It was the playlist, or maybe my husband played it. I can't remember, that I had with Gabriel. And I had that in my mind. I went to the bathroom. My husband, helped me. And I started crying. It was just bringing back memories of him and memories of giving birth to him. And put me in that headspace of just remembering all of that. And I started crying to my husband and I said, I feel like I'm being a baby. And I said, I feel like I'm being ungrateful because this baby is going to live, and this baby, we don't know that this baby has any heart problems. And this baby, I'm going to get to take him home, and Lord willing, he won't have to stay in the hospital at all. We've never brought a baby home from the hospital right after delivery. We'll be able to just take him home and he'll be healthy. And I'm being ungrateful by saying I can't do this. I have to do this, and I can do this. And I remember I just kept thinking of Gabriel and thinking that I missed him. And it made me think of this baby. And I was thinking, I want to meet this baby. I'm going to meet this baby. And no one else can do this but me. No one else can give birth to him but me. I have to do it, and I will do it. And it gave me this unbelievable like surge of I don't know what it was. I guess endorphins were probably a factor. And I was like, I can do this. I'm going to give birth to him. I'm going to meet him. I'm going to hold him right after he's born. And I'm going to have a baby that I can hold and I can bond with, and I'm going to take him home. And I've never been able to do that right away. And so I came out, and then while I was having these thoughts, and I'm telling my husband, I'm being ungrateful. I need to switch this. I want to meet this baby. I miss Gabriel. I'm going to do this for him. This is giving me the strength to do this. I started having contractions, and and they were intense, and they were like, and I literally had one while I was there, and I said, that was a big one. And my husband was like, really? And I said, yeah, that was a big one. So then I stood up and I start making my way back to the room. And I'm trying to tell my mom, this revelation that I've had, and I'm having them as I speak. And I'm like, I can't even talk right now because they were that strong. And so the midwife, I don't know if anyone called her or if she just happened to stop by at that moment, but she comes, and I'm telling her, and I told her as soon as she comes in, she goes, I said, he's coming now. He's coming. And she's like, I said it just like I knew it. And she's like, really? And I said, yes, he's coming. I said, these contractions are real. And this is like, I knew that this was the end. I was like, this is I know this is active labor. I'm there, and it won't be long. And she's like, well, okay. And so she kind of took me up my word, what I was saying. And then I had some contractions, and she was doing counter pressure, which has never worked for me. I've actually always hated counter pressure. I always assumed because of my scoliosis that it kind of isn't right for me, but she was able to do it, and it worked. And so she was applying counter pressure, and something I did this time was to talk to him while I was having contractions. And I didn't really mean to. I just started doing that. And I think that helped. I've heard of that before, and it never really occurred to me, but it actually helped a lot. I don't know, to connect with him and make me feel like we were doing it together. Him being born and me giving birth, and just helped me also to focus on him rather than the contraction. And it kind of shifted that a little bit, just enough to make it better, I think. And so I had a surge of energy after this, where I remember being so weak and tired, but I was pushing through that. I knew my body was telling me I needed to move him down. I knew, because that had been the whole thing too, is he wasn't very low. And so he wasn't low enough. So I knew I needed to be moving him down. And so I was on my hands and knees, and then I stood up at one point, and they raised the bed so I could kind of lean and stand. And then I've heard of women doing this, of squatting, and I've always thought it sounded terrifying to squat during a contraction, because that does not sound pleasant. And I've always thought, no way would I want to squat. And I think I tried it with Gabriel. I tried a squat, and it was a no, 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 no. I don't know if it was where he was at or what, but I was like, no, 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 I'm not doing that again. So this time I was surprised to find that I wanted to squat. And I think it was my body knew that he needed to be lowered. And so but I wasn't physically strong enough to squat, because the magnesium, I started to fall every time I tried to squat. So they set me up to where my husband was like lifting me up, and then holding my mom's hands across the bed to brace. And then they were like, we probably have one of those stools. So they went and got one, and I had a few contractions like that, and then they were able to locate the stool. I kept feeling it, and I could tell he was moving down. I could tell exactly when he was moving down, and then I would have another contraction, and sometimes he wouldn't move. I could tell, like, that one didn't move him down. it felt like I dilated more, but he didn't move. And so I would get scared, like, oh, maybe he's getting stuck. I don't know why. I was just like, always goes to that. My mind always goes to that, even though it literally has never happened to me. So I'm like, maybe he's getting stuck. Maybe he's getting stuck. And then looking back, now that I know how much he weighed, he was not getting stuck. He was very small. He was only 5 pounds, 7 ounces. I mean, he was born at 36 weeks. So he was smaller. And I think because she had checked me right before that, and she said, well, you're still 7 centimeters and 70% effaced. So there's still a good bit of cervix that he has to work through. And looking back, I think that's why, because this phase of contractions were extremely intense and it lasted for about a couple hours. Whereas with Gabriel, I remember that level of contractions did not last as long. But I think it was because he was bigger. So it took him less time to push that cervix and all that stuff out of the way. And this one, his head had to work a little harder because he was just smaller. So it took him a little bit longer to push it out of the way to do all that work. So this time the plan was for my husband to catch the baby. We wanted my husband to catch him. And so the midwife knew that. We had already talked to her about that. And I was on the stool for one contraction. And then all of a sudden I thought his head was coming out. I reached down and it was not his head. At least I couldn't feel his head. Maybe I didn't try hard enough. I don't know. But I didn't feel his head. But I knew he was right there. The next contraction after that, my body, again, I felt like it was out of my control, bolted me forward onto my hands and knees and to where I was holding onto the bed with one hand at the corner of it. And I was on the floor. The rest of me was on the floor. I was just hands and knees. And I was kind of yelling because I couldn't see them. And I had this fear that they weren't going to be ready. I was like, he's coming. You need to be ready. And so they're like, yeah, we know. I asked my mom later, I was like, how did you know that like he was coming? And she's like, when you got on your hands and knees, like it was obvious that he was coming. So my husband got ready. I don't even know if he was wearing gloves now that I think about it. I don't remember if he put gloves on or not, but he was ready. And the midwife was like, let me get my gloves. Because she said later, she said, women, I can't remember. She said 3 C's. She said they either cuss or they say I can't. And then she had another C. And she said, that's what I look for when the baby is about to come. And she said, you didn't do those things. And so I wasn't ready. I had said I can't much earlier. And by the time I was in the end of it, I was in the zone and I was like, I was on it. And so she's like getting her stuff ready. And I said, no, he's coming like now. And then I felt like I didn't have to push. It was just one tiny push and he came and I didn't tear. I mean, he was so small. So that was also part of it. And yeah, it was just very quick as far as pushing goes, very easy. And my husband got to catch him and his cord was wrapped around his neck. And so my husband got to be the one to take him out. And we have a video. I don't remember if my husband unwrapped it or if the midwife unwrapped it and then passed him to me. And, yeah, so this time we got to do the golden hour, the skin to skin, the breastfeeding, all of that. And so all of the stuff that I dreamt about was possible. And I really, before I had thought that Gabriel's birth was my redemptive birth. And I thought, getting to do that natural birth, I was like, oh, wow, that's my redemptive birth. And now that I had pre-eclampsia again with my third, and I had to be induced, and I had to go through the same things I went through with my first, I realize now that this was the redemptive birth. This third was the redemptive birth that God gave me to heal a lot of what I went through the first time and to show me that he can take me through it and he can give me enough strength to do that, no matter where your birth takes you. And I really believe that any woman can do natural birth. For some women, it's probably easier than others. I think some women seem to have won the genetic lottery or something and they don't have pain and stuff like that. But for most of us, it's not quite like that. But I do believe that women are built for it and women are made to give birth. And so I think it's a beautiful thing to give birth. And I realized this is my redemptive birth. I got to redeem so much. And even though I had preeclampsia, again, I got to go through it, I guess without the epidural, I got to do that and prove that to myself that I could. And so that healed a lot of a lot of that stuff from the first one. And so Gabriel was just my bonus dream birth that I got to have. And I love everything about birth. I love the more babies I have. I think you would think it would wear off or something, but it just doesn't. And the fact that every life is a miracle. And that's something that I talked to the geneticist about Gabriel. He had a genetic condition. I didn't mention this. I forgot to, but he had a genetic condition that had caused his heart defect. And it's not the same as, he didn't have Down syndrome. It's not the same. But it's similar in that Down syndrome is an extra chromosome, and he had the right number of chromosomes, but a piece of one broke off. And that's what caused his heart problems. And it causes other things as well. It can cause developmental delays and things like that. And the geneticist was talking to us about it. And he said, and he had been a geneticist, I think he said 37 years. And I asked him at the end, I asked all the questions I could. And then I asked him at the end, I said, is there anything I should be asking that I'm not thinking of, that I forgot, that I missed? And he said, no, I just want to tell you that every life has value and no life is by accident. And he said, so this might seem like it was just an accident that he has this or something like that. But it's not, it's on purpose. God made him on purpose, and he has value, and every life has value. And he told me, I've been a geneticist for a long time, and God designs everyone. He designs each and every person. So it's just amazing to me to see how God has gotten me through each birth. And even though it hasn't always gone the way I wanted it to, but God has a plan even when yours doesn't go the right way. And his plan is better than our plan. And so, yeah. So now I've got my 2 boys here and my 1 boy in heaven. But yeah, he has taken care of me every step of the way through each birth. And even when I knew I couldn't do it, because I couldn't, my strength couldn't do it, but his strength can. And he will give you the strength to go through that, to do that. And I think some women, if you don't know that, then, you don't know that. And it's not necessarily your fault. But I guess, I think that God can give every woman the strength, and he can get every woman through natural birth, and even interventions and making it harder and more pain. And, because sometimes those things do bring about more pain than just a birth that's left on its own. But he can get you through that. And so it's just amazing to me to see his hand through each of them, weaving through each of them.
Wow.
That was a lot. I know.
But thank you for sharing, and thank you for taking us on the journey that you went through, from your first through the second into the third. I mean, so many things. You are so strong. You're so strong.
It's definitely the Lord.
Yeah.
Because like I said, each time I knew in my heart, I knew I couldn't do it. I just knew it. And even once you tell yourself that, you can't, even once you tell yourself that means you can't. If you say that you can't, you can't.
Yeah.
And so, but he came through each time that it's such a blessing, because I was saying I can't do it, but he still stepped in and proved to me, yeah, you can't, but I can. You just have to get out of it.
Yeah. Well, Jaylynn, thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and thank you for sharing. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can reach me at Surrendered Birth Services on Instagram, or email me at contact@surrenderedbirthservices.com. Be sure not to miss an episode by hitting the follow button. Also, we'd love for you to leave a written review of the show so that more people's births and lives can be changed by the love of Jesus and the empowerment of accurate birth education. If you really enjoyed this episode in particular, please take a screenshot of it and post it to your Instagram story, tagging Surrendered Birth Services. If you would like to be a guest on the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, please click the link in the episode show notes to fill out your interest form. Also, if you're interested in taking my childbirth classes, birth consultations, or having me as your birth doula, please click on the link in the show notes to take you to my website for online and in-person options. Just as a reminder, this show is not giving medical advice, so please continue to see your personal care provider as needs arise. We hope you have a great week, and remember, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands.
They raised the bed so I could lean, like I could put my hands on it. What, honey?
The guys.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. But I got to talk, okay? You got to be quiet, okay? Okay.
The guys.
Yeah, you can't play the guitar right now, okay? Yes, ma'am? Okay, go put it in your room. Go try to put it in your case. He's got his guitar.